Hello, everyone. Welcome to session 2 of the Endeavour Dialogue series. We have an interesting topic for you today, the growing importance of digital identity. The rapid pace of digitalization that's impacting us in many ways in private life, in our life as students, in our life as educators, in our lives as citizens, and of course in the way the government manages our nations. Digitalization has become a key driver to the whole process. And one of the important outcomes of this is the establishment of digital identities. What is this? What is a digital identity? And here to talk a little bit more about this, our panel of experts today, Mr. Tan Kim Leng, founder, director of KDI Incorporated of Singapore. And Kim Leng is one of the pioneers in Singapore government's path towards digitalization, building of the smart government, and a renowned expert in the field of ICT knowledge and also implementation of government digital transformation programs around the world. Also with us this morning is Mr. Soon Koi Woon, or KV. KV Soon is also a professional in ICT, also has substantial experience in working on digital government transformation programs in key countries in Southeast Asia, as well as in the Pacific Islands and Africa as well. So to share some insights as well as some thoughts and ideas about how digital identities are impacting us in every way, I will hand over to our panel of experts. Perhaps we can start with the question of what a digital identity is, why the need for it. Maybe we can start with Kim Leng.
Thank you, Nanda. Now, to start off, we need to define what is identification. What is digital identification, right? I think at the most basic level, when we talk about identification, we are talking about answering the very basic question of who are we dealing with, okay? Because many services and transactions are delivered to specific individual, and very often we need to know, those services that are delivered to the right person, right? So to identify the person that you're delivering the services to is one of the key questions that has to be answered for the service provider to make sure that they provide these services to the right person. Now, of course, to do that, you need to make sure there is a trustworthy mechanism to ensure the identification of the individual are accurate and up to date, right? Now, when we come to digital identification, we are talking about doing this identification across the digital media, okay, with the use of internet and services delivered across the use of the internet or online services, then the digital identification become one of the necessary mechanism to establish who we are dealing with, right? So this is the basic definition of identification and digital identification. Now, why do we need identification, or digital identification? Now, in the government context, at the country level, right, there must be a means of, knowing who are obtaining the services from the government. And there are a number of concerns that the government have that result in the need for national level digital or identification schemes to be put in place, right? The first and foremost is to really be able to ensure that the people are included in economic, health, and other social safety net mechanisms by the government. And to do all that, you need to be able to deliver this to the specific individual that the identity can be established. So that is for the service delivery standpoint. Now, there are other use of identification, such as, to provide a voter verification during the democratic process, of voter for elections. And of course, there is also a need for ensuring national security, and therefore identification and the mechanisms and the documentation that comes along with that increasingly become critical, for government to deal with the citizen. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim Leng. Some quick insights there. Perhaps you'd like to add to this, KV?
Yeah, thank you, Nanda. Thanks, Kim Leng. I think Kim Leng has given a very big and very important definition. 2 points, just want to reiterate. When we talk about digital identification, before we jump to the excitement of digital everything, we need to talk about identification at the start. So there is no doubt the value of identification in terms of governance, in terms of how a country is governed, and where the outcomes of socio-economic development, safety nets, as Kim Leng mentioned, access to economic equity. I think all these have to be presented to the government to make policy. So the identification is the very fundamental building blocks of who we are, where are we, and because of this fundamental information, we can build upon them to help government govern better. So that's really the key. I think not that much to add to what Kim Leng has said. So I think these are the key points are there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. So moving on from there, as nations progress in this journey towards digitalization, what are the challenges in implementing such policies as well as processes towards realizing digital identification for its citizens as well as for organizations?
Yeah, maybe allow me to address at the conceptual level, what are the key mechanisms that are involved in digital identification. I think when we look at the whole scheme of things holistically, there are at least 4 components, right? The first component is identity management, right? Making sure that we know, who we are dealing with from a accuracy standpoint, right? We need to be able to establish the identity of the person and sometimes the company or entities that we are dealing with, right? So identity management is one of the key things that has to be dealt with. The second part to this is the authentication management, right? How do you verify a claim across the digital media that somebody say who, he is? And authentication is really a mechanism to put forward a challenge, through a digital media to establish that claim of identity. Okay. The third part to this is access management. Right? Access management is really when somebody is able to get into the digital space, after establishing his identity and his credential is authenticated, then we talk about what rights does this person has in accessing to the services and resources in the digital media. Okay, and the last part of this is privacy management, because this involves providing data about the person. Therefore, increasingly there are concerns about how those information will be protected, and it has to be addressed. So the identity scheme or identification management scheme that needs to be established in the digital world will need to combine all this into a seamless whole to address a trusted infrastructure or identification, that the user of the system would then have the comfort that, by having all this mechanism, he's able to use the services and have a good experience and secure mechanism to obtain those services. So essentially, these are the confluence of factors or mechanism that has to take place within the digital identification scheme. Thank you.
Would you like to add to that, perhaps, KV? Just also maybe adding some thoughts about what are the risks involved in establishing digital identification?
I think, thanks, Nanda. I think Kim has given a very interesting, very critical and important frame, from identity to authentication and access management, privacy. These are very, very critical items. It's part of a larger framework in order to build a very good identity system, right? So good identification really is about a trusted infrastructure. What I've spoken to a few, governments and few organizations, what we're actually building is we're building a infra of where we can create an infrastructure of trust. Right? Ultimately, it boils down to trust. When people invest in a country, they come into a place and they partner with someone, they have to know that this is a trusted system, that I'm talking to someone and I'm going to put money in, and when we start a business, we don't want the money to disappear, because then we realize this guy is not who he say he is. You see, the system's the check and balance needs to be there. So really it's about infrastructure of trust is what we're trying to build. And the second thing is, you talk about challenges. I think one of the big challenges is the lack of patience sometimes, right? Because the challenge, the problem today is we are all very driven by the need to go digital. So, when we need the need to go digital, people get very excited. Let's go digital. We need digital ID, and they tend to not look at these frameworks seriously, right? And try to push things through. So, oh yeah, I can have an ID. You just have to have a login password or single sign on, and that's it. So from the digital perspective, a lot of people seem to just simplify that, and that in the long run will have impact on its integrity and its trustworthiness of the whole identification process. So this is very big challenge today. I see, or one of the challenges I see. So I think we need to take note of that.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. So, in addressing this growing need to have a grip on digital identification, what is the role that the authorities can play in streamlining this, making it seamless? It is indeed becoming a reality that we all have to grasp. So what can the authorities do to improve the process or make it smoother for adaptation? And what are the gaps and challenges perhaps also in addressing this?
Yep. Let me take that question. Now, there are at least 3 critical roles that any authority in a country will have to take on to build this trusted infrastructure like what KV had mentioned. I think the first role is the legal role, right? And this concerns governance. And essentially, in order for digital transactions to take place, you need to have the Electronic Transaction Act, to safeguard and to build up the trust of doing services and transaction online, so that legally that transaction can be recognized. The second part to this is the Evidence Act, right? How to make sure that if there is a contract that is signed digitally, okay, or any transaction that take place, is again verifiable, and there is a non-repudiation mechanism built in. So when an electronic transaction or contract happen, there is no way to say I didn't sign that, okay, because there is a mechanism within the digital realm to make sure that that happens. So as a legal concept, these are important uh, mechanism, or I would say governance steps that the authority have to take, to build the trust, in the society, in the businesses, to use the digital means to conduct business. Okay. The second role is to really build such an infrastructure and administer it, and that involves designing very robust systems and data to ensure identification mechanisms can take place. Okay, and to do that, it involves onboarding of people or individuals, right? Uh, Taking on the design of a biometric system to enhance the robustness of the identification, put in place single sign-on digital authentication means, so that there is an easy and simple way for people to get online, to verify the claims that who they are. And of course, issuing that digital ID, be it, physical or virtual kind of identification documentation, to the citizens or the people that can use that as a way, to get into the electronic realm to conduct the business. Yeah, so this is the second part where the building up of the infrastructure is very important. Okay, and if the individual uh, institutions or even private sector institutions try to build those infrastructure, it's going to cost a lot, and there is no common way of synchronizing this across the entire country to do that. So, typically this role has to be taken up by an authority to make sure that this is well designed, seamless integration, and as a national standard is adopted throughout the country. Okay. The third part is the role for the third part for the authority is to really become a promoter, right, of the use of this kind of mechanism, and ensuring there is enough adoption in the society. Okay, and to adopt a digital identification mechanism will also require a building up of, the trust by the citizen, right? How can their information, their data that has been captured and utilized, especially the biometric data. Today we talk about collecting fingerprint, facial features, or even iris. And these are very sensitive data that has to be very carefully managed. And to promote the use of these uh, types of mechanism involving biometric features of the users is not a trivial, adoption challenge, right? So there are people who are very concerned about, this feature being captured and used by any authority. So how can we promote the use of this is also something that, the authority have to think about. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim Leng. So you have highlighted key factors which would include legislative action by government, perhaps even looking at ensuring an ecosystem from the administrative perspective, and also the pivoting promotional aspect of it, maybe even ensuring the facilitation of infrastructure to drive this. Perhaps, KV, you might want to weigh in with your thoughts on the same issue as well, and maybe even touch on some of the practical experiences that you may have had here in Malaysia, as well as in some of the other countries that you're familiar with.
Thank you, Nantha. I think I want to jump on the point that Kim Leng mentioned on implementation. I think if you look at it look at digital identification or identification as a whole, where you build an infrastructure of trust, your systems, the legal functions are very, very good. What would be the next important thing is getting the people to appreciate it, right? I think people always have a concern, and that concern really boils down to what is in it for me. It's a very simple question. If the identity process or application is just there, it doesn't have any use, it will be very difficult for you to accept. So it has to be contextualized to situations or environments that there is a use for it, not just benefit for the governments or the authorities, but also benefit to the people, right? So one example, very simple, right? Aid distribution, okay, right? How do I know I'm receiving aid? It should be given to me and I'm getting it. How do I know that it's not given to somebody else, right? What is due to me, right? So when I go in, I want to know that, yes, I'm eligible for certain aid package from the government, and I'm able to verify, authenticate my identity, and now I'll get it. So once I've done that, I feel safe. I feel comfortable that no one else can go in and do that on my behalf. It's almost like a banking system. You go in the bank, you log in for a transaction, you put in money or you take out money. You want to feel safe that no one else can do that on your behalf. So that's the important part. So people need to feel confident, and there is a benefit to them. So that's important. But I think we need to, governments or authorities, while it is important to set these infrastructures in place, it's also important to take this to the public and say, this is how it works for you, and this is what you can do with it. I think this is a message really just as important as setting your infrastructure. Otherwise, no one will use it. Nobody, you say it's trusted, but nobody trusts you. I think that's really what needs to be done. So the work to be done is not trivial. It requires a lot of think through, and it also talks about not just about identity. It's a call for digital services or digital government services to the people, right? Because if I'm offering a service, you sign up to transact your land information, you buy land, you buy a piece of land, you want to investigate, query a land title, query a companies. I want to partner with company ABC. I want to go in and see the identity of ABC and who are the owners, the public information. I want to know that once I do that, I get this information, this is accurate for me to make critical decisions, right? So this contextualization and use cases they are very important and has to give enough emphasis, right? So it's not an exercise in technology development, having fun with biometrics and everything, right? The technology is cool, but the usage should be even cooler. Right?
Thank you, KV and Kim Leng. Now, as we now getting ready to close up the session, perhaps a quick question and feedback from both of you. So what's the way forward? What are the key actions that should be taken to achieve reasonably satisfactory level of digital identification that's suitable for our systems? Perhaps Kim Leng, you can start with your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thank you. I think there are a couple of things that the government or the authorities can do to address some of these key challenges of using digital identification. Now, I think the first one is managing the expectation and the benefits that can be realized through the use of such a mechanism. Now, at the most basic level, when services are provided without digital identification, many countries relies on multiple documentation that takes a very long time to verify. So it can take hours or even days right? In the private sector, if you go to a bank and it takes 2 to 3 days to open an account because we need to verify who you are because you're submitting all the documentation, and this in itself is a lot of inconvenience, right? So if imagine you have a robust digital identification infrastructure, and this onboarding process, right, or trying to get services, the verification of who you are can take place within seconds or minutes, literally, and you don't have to supply different types of documentation, like you have to bring your birth cert, your passport or whatnot, a driver's license. You just rely on a robust digital identification infrastructure. That process can take place within seconds or even faster than a couple of seconds to verify who you are. So managing that expectations of the stakeholder, why do we need to get onto this, by communicating the benefits and how it's going to change the life of the citizen, to get very accurate and fast service from the service provider and the government is a very key component of encouraging, the citizen or the user to get on board, right? So to be able to manage that is very critical. And the second part of this is to really address the need for the data, right? Because we're going to deal with a lot of data in this sense, the citizen data. This could be sensitive data. How can we ensure the data are well structured, well managed, up to date, and privacies of the citizens are protected, through the use of data privacy law and whatnot. These are also very critical ways to address the concern about, this sensitive data captured by the authority. Yeah. The third thing is to really have a robust and responsive operations on digital identification. So in case that, there is an identity fraud, that credential could be disabled and, new credential could be issued and so on. So as an operational concern, right, there must be a robust, responsive, service delivery framework that goes with managing, how do you re-establish the credential when something happens, right? So these are the few things that, the government can do to address those challenges that we talk about and have a more seamless experience in the journey of adopting a digital identification infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim Leng. Your thoughts, final thoughts on this issue, KV?
I think let's contextualize it to today's situation. I think there are a couple of identification issues and challenges that we think about. I think Kim Leng talked about very importantly some of and continue to emphasize the importance of this whole framework and structure that needs to be trusted and have a strong integrity value. Today, there's also another element. It is the exchanging of this information beyond our authority, beyond the level and the frame of our authority. Okay, let's look at COVID, for example. I think now the situation, COVID have brought up a few key challenges that we all need to think about. Number one, okay, a collection of personal data, where we visit, where we go and have our food, where do we visit shops. All this information is tied to our identity. So I think one of the big concerns is, are they being used correctly? Are they effectively being used? And the big question is there any abuse at the back end of the question? So the whole trusted environment now extend, not just keeping the identity trusted, but the application of the data and extension of data need to be trusted as well. So that's one. How do we enable this information to be data to be trusted? Okay, is to have proper exchange protocol. This is a very technical perspective, and the other one is actually showing how it is being used, right? See, I'm going to use it for contact tracing, then tell people these are the steps I'm using your data to contact tracing. Some governments have done this very well, and we are very clear the steps. Many governments don't even tell you how it is done. Yet, when you see situations like COVID numbers increasing, and we have collecting tons of data, we don't see any correlation in terms of the collection of data and the cases, and people get worried. So I think the value and the importance of trust now becomes even more critical and even more bigger. So I think once you get into a digital environment, COVID has teaching us now to think about it more carefully. First thing. Secondly, in the news today, I just browsed it and I was just kind of trying to search the news again, is that vaccine certificates. There was a situation where I came across the news this morning that they found out the vaccine certificate cannot be trusted, is potentially fraud, and the airline cannot use it. So this is one case. We need to look at it, and I believe this case will continue to surface, because when we rush to issue an identification to a process, a vaccine, right? So you have to now bridge the integrity of two processes. The integrity and the trusted process of the vaccine administration with the trusted infrastructure of identification. And you put it online to share across different agencies. We now talk about a digital environment. So it behooves us, it behooves the government to really think about this very, very carefully. I believe governments are not thinking deep enough because we all want to open our economies, which I think is the right thing to do. We need to rush to open economies, but we must also give enough emphasis to really think about this carefully, because we know how dangerous this is. If you make a mistake, we create clusters of the disease, and clusters will grow into more infections, and you see economic close again. So it will have a counter effect to the outcomes that we want. So I think we need to think about this very, very carefully, right? Of course, there's the other perspective, people questioning the usage and privacy. I think deal with that another round. A lot of people have written about this. But really the emphasis here is that if you want to be a trusted authority, you need to be transparent in your process and how you're handling the data, the personal information is given over to you. So that's really key. And today we are facing this challenge. The problems that happen, the challenges that arise are situations or in conditions where the whole trusted infrastructure is not taken very seriously. So this is my view. So, perhaps maybe Kim can, weigh on this if you have some thoughts, on this situation.
Well, definitely trying to address the trust issue in any digital initiative is very key to the success of such kind of projects, right? So I think what is really important is to have a transparent process and a decision-making framework, so that we can show to the public that these things are used in a controlled manner, right, to facilitate, the service delivery, and to protect the interests and the rights of the citizen, right? That process is important. The legal aspect of that comes in a form in many countries today, looking into privacy and data protection framework and legal mechanism to support this framework. Yeah, so these are things that practically can be done today, right, to give assurance, to the citizens and the user of the system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We have heard some interesting insights and feedback on this very, very relevant and important topic of digital identification and its role on our lives today. We can take one question. We have Mr. Tai Ngo Kok, who is tuning in from Hanoi in Vietnam. Tai, would you like to raise your question for the panel, please?
Yes, thank you, Nantha. So thank you, Kim Ling and Sun have shared very interesting topic about digital identities, and I'm very interested in the speak of Kim Ling. So talking about building have a trust digital identity infrastructure for the country or for the any country or authority want to implement a good digital service. So I wondering, just have one question, to get the opinion from your point of view in terms of the trust digital identity infrastructure. So from my observation, there are two different ways to implement the digital identity infrastructure. So from the framework point of view or the architecture point of view, so many countries selected the so-called the PKI, public key infrastructure, for their authentication framework. But lesser country, including Singapore, have I think, a better and successful digital identity system, not off to select the public key infrastructure. Rather, the Singaporean government offer so-called the national authentication framework through the SingPass and the series of the identity application provided by the governments and widespread to even the private sector application. So my question is, do you have any comment or any recommendation to those two different mechanisms? So which one should be suitable for what kind of organization or the cities? For example, Vietnam with around 100 million of population. So it is the national authentication framework similar to Singapore is suitable to work in Vietnam environment or not? Just share with you that in Vietnam currently is a government still offer the PKI, I mean the public key infrastructure. So there are multiple private certificate authentication agencies to provide the authentication service. Even with the national identity still uniquely issued by the government through, of course, still through multiple personal document. But the authentication framework provided, authentication service provided by multiple private sector. So is there any pros and cons for those two different models? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, maybe let me address these two different but closely related mechanisms. Now, I think when we talk about using PKI and so on, we are talking about authenticating person to documentation, meaning that, you know, when we issue a contract, right, and we need to digitally sign on the physical contract, then you will need some kind of PKI or digital certificate mechanism, right, to encrypt those documents and tie it back to the person so that it achieve what we call a non-repudiation effect, you know, to this digital documentation. Now, if you are using or you're signing on to do a transaction or to submit, you know, a request or to buy something, is what we call electronic transaction, and therefore the token-based authentication for recognizing that transaction is the mechanism that are being used today, right? Or increasingly, you know, we are moving into what we call two-factor authentication for signing on to a system to recognize that particular transaction that will take place in the cyberspace. So these are two rather different type of technology, but if you use it in combination, it can achieve the effect of recognizing the transaction. And of course, in certain circumstances where, you know, signing of digital documentation like contracts and agreement and so on online, then the PKI infrastructure will become very, very useful as well. So really, it's about what we are authenticating, right? If authenticating services transaction, then the two-factor authentication or multiple factor authentication are becoming increasingly important, right? If you're dealing with electronic documents, signing, certifying documents, encrypting documents, to achieve the non-repudiation effect as well for the signing of the document, then I think the PKI infrastructure would be, very useful. So that is my thoughts. Of course, there are many other technological considerations like using blockchain and all those mechanisms that can achieve some effect, of non-repudiation, could also be considered, but they have different strength and different users. Thank you.
KB, would you have any thoughts to the question posed by Tai?
So I think well covered by Kim Leng. I'll leave it as it is. Otherwise, we'll jump into blockchain and we'll have another another long discussion after this. So I think it's good, very well covered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kim Leng. Thank you very much, KB Sun, for the fascinating insights to this new field of knowledge and digital identification, the growingly important role that it's playing in all our lives. So this is brings to an end the second dialogue session, Endeavour Dialogue series. We will be coming forth with you with more relevant and useful insights from our panel of experts. So do tune in and look out for us on endeavour.asia. Thank you very much and have a productive week ahead. Bye.